Hello, internets, and welcome to Split Screen D&D, the show where we are spending our action surge to attack all things D&D from both sides of the screen.
That's a D&D reference right there.
Ooh.
You know we're legit.
Don't expect many of those. We do everything in our power to stay as D&D irrelevant in this otherwise D&D podcast. But today, I think let's just jump right into it. It's going to be an interesting topic today. So
I think so too.
off.
But to start off, my name is Josh Winans. I'm the audio guy here, and I'm also a player character known as Kel.
Excellent point. We both have names. I am Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth. And now let's get into it. I think
Yeah. So what I thought would be fun to tackle is the idea of in D&D, you are the hero. You're busting down doors. You're kicking ass, taking names. But sometimes that dice is just not on your side, and you're gonna fail. And what to do as a character, and also as a DM, how to react to failures that the players might have, or just all around. And you have to adapt to that a lot. So
okay.
yeah,
So failure in general. I love it. I love it. As a DM, there's nothing I love more than failure in the game. And I'm saying that partially hyperbolically, but I'm also it's actually true that more times when we're reminiscing about a game, it's either the failures or the very near failures where people are going. I mean, in both cases, an easy win is one that goes right under the rug and it's really never brought up again. So I guess I am to some extent being pretty serious that I really do like failures in the game of D&D. But before we really dive into that, we'd appreciate it if you guys would go ahead and bust those dice out and make a subscription check right here at Modern Myth. It means a huge amount to everyone here at Modern Myth. You guys just letting us know that you're enjoying the content. You want to see more coming from Split Screen. So jump down there, like, comment, subscribe, hit the little bell, and we certainly hope that you do not fail on that one. But jump right in. Let's get after failures here.
yeah. So as I was thinking about this topic, I kind of came to the same conclusion that you just kind of went to, that it's the failures that can really define a character, and which is another one of those things that separates D&D as a tabletop game and a lot of the video games that you come across. In a video game, you never want to fail. I mean, if you fail, you reload from a start, like a quick save or something like that.
Right.
So what is it about D&D that you almost want to embrace those failures?
Well, I think from a DM standpoint, the failures ultimately are what lends so much texture to a given scene, a given encounter, such that, again, take any rando battle that you're engaged in. Let's say characters waltz right into the room. They're level 18. The 4 goblins in the room let out a shriek as each of the characters expends a couple of their highly valuable powers, and just simply goblins cease to exist.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those situations where you rapidly find yourself in a space where there's no flavor in the big wins. And that's not to say there are big wins that are just the sigh of relief. Everyone is so elated, but it was because the threat of failure always existed during that encounter.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think it's really that, and that's you bring up kind of the way it differentiates between and obviously there are many tabletop systems that share this quality, but certainly video games, and I would say maybe increasingly with contemporary video games, failure really is all right, it's time to reload. And seeing as D&D has no save points, the threat of failure that is always hanging there is what lends weight to the game in general.
Right.
And the reason I think you go back and when you're reminiscing at the table about, one thing I was just thinking about recently, and this is not a chuckling reminiscing, but you guys were facing down a pit lord. Well, I should say kind of an aspect of a pit lord.
Yeah, it wasn't a full
so not
pit
a true
lord.
pit lord.
We weren't
Don't start telling the internet you faced down a fucking pit
No,
lord.
it was,
all right?
it was like a shadow. Of a
it was
pit lord kind of
like an imp, really, I guess is the better way.
thing. It was more legit than an imp,
Yeah,
but
no,
it was
but you amidst all of that was playing out, and it was a chaotic battle. A lot of things were at play. It got down to the point where everyone in the party had been downed. One character, Aster, is left standing.
the wizard.
The wizard is left standing.
Always a good one to have.
And
left.
there was so much tension in that moment. I mean, we were hanging hit points away from a TPK, and when the encounter finished, when she ultimately ended up destroying this battery source that was kind of fueling the demon's being in the material plane, which was a slick insight on her behalf.
Yeah.
Because she was not going to beat it outright. I can guarantee that no matter how many tricks she had up her sleeve in terms of direct combat. But it was obvious as a DM, it was obvious, I think, as all the players, that failure was a very real possibility. And it loses all of that weight when you know that what failure means is we redo the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's a great experience from a DM standpoint. Talk with me a little bit about the way that, as a player, you and I've seen it so many times from everyone at the table, and it's an amazing thing to see. It's a great thing to see as a DM when people really take the reins on those failures and turn them into something. I mean, there's no turning a failure into a win.
No.
But there's turning a failure into something maybe that doesn't resemble a failure quite as much. A pig with some lipstick on, let's say. So give me a sense of, like, what is that process? And talk with me about that importance, the importance of embracing those failures. Because it's a necessary for sure.
Oh yeah. For me, it really, because there was a point where I get upset when I failed things. Hey, I'm a mid-max or power gamer, go figure. But what it started to, it was amazing how when that happened, how much I sucked the energy away from the table, and it was again
the notion.
it's taking away from people's experience at the table. So and then I swear we're gonna get through an episode without referencing. You know what? I'm not going to say their name. There is a game.
They who shall not be named.
There's a game out there. It's very popular that I saw that when they failed, they made it interesting. They still failed, but it either showed some insight into the character that they were playing, or it made a comedic moment, or it empowered other people.
Right.
It added to the game instead of took away from the game.
I like that you touched on the notion of a comedic moment, and I will say the name because I actually do want to give some credit to the level of success I think their game has found in embracing failures. I do think that there are many characters, almost every single campaign, you could pick out certain characters in Critical Role who their job almost was to embrace failures hard and really bring the levity to the game. And I wanted to touch on levity. I, as a DM, I'm a pretty seriously toned in terms of the way I think about the game, in terms of the way I write it.
Especially this campaign.
Yeah, and this campaign has definitely had a kind of a very serious, a pretty grounded tone. I mean, we're starting to get into those levels where you simply can't remain grounded.
No.
And still believe that, we're not to level 18, but let's just say a level 18 character going, yes, I will deal with those muskrats, sir. No problem.
Right.
I mean,
You're fighting gods at that point.
Yeah, you rapidly are getting to the place, the goblin example that we talked about, where the game does have a certain scaling that needs to occur to continue to challenge the players and continue to offer the threat of failure. But what I love is that so much of the levity, and I imagine this is the case at almost any table, but the importance, I appreciate the importance because the narrative that's kind of spooling out in Rakish Rovers is such a serious has such a serious tone that I really appreciate it when a player will lean in to those natural ones, will lean into,
Right.
because it creates all of this levity, and what could have been a really tense scene, suddenly there's this break, and it takes an immense weight off of me as a DM to add some levity. And I mean, there's certainly ways that I can do this. Reek had been a major
Reek was major
lever in that.
but he's dead
but
now. So
thus the tone of the campaign we were referenced earlier. No, but so I really love that. A great example of that is you guys came upon this merciless trap room, this murder box as it came to be known. And there was such a crazy series of events that played out that ultimately resulted in you having a severed hand. They attempt to heal you. They give you a potion that no one was supposed to take more than like a single drop. I mean, it was just a sequence of hijinks, and it really, I mean, everyone walked away from that table feeling like it was a completely different game that night because so much levity had been generated.
Yeah.
It was like the build of static electricity.
right. Yeah, I think I was crying from laughing so hard when I think if it was handled differently, I would have, like, my character lost his hand. I'm a martial character. That's kind of a big deal. But instead I just like was laughing my butt off.
Yeah, and I mean, totally rolled with it. I think you even maybe got more kind of aggressive with your hijinks.
Yeah.
when you were, and this is already a great example. You can feel there's a certain energy in this conversation. We're talking about failure in the game right now.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about failure in Dungeons and Dragons is it is such a catalyst for levity and humor and to the same point, and you touched on this with regard to Critical Role, there's also great opportunity to reveal important things about your character in their failures.
Right.
Kel being another great example of a number of
PTSD.
failures ultimately kind of spurred on your PTSD. And this was, I would say, the first glimpses of the rest of the party, really that the DM, I mean, we worked through your backstory, but kind of in real time at the table, the first glimpses that anyone was getting that Kel wasn't just a stoic meat shield. Like there's something more going on under there, and it's not as easy to roll a crit and reveal those things about yourself.
Yeah, no, because then you're just being a badass and it's all good.
Usually it's just kind of like, "Yeah!" and then something
Exactly.
explodes. You know,
It's usually what happens. Well, to that point, think of any hero in book or movie. They go through hard tribulations, and without that, it's like getting sharpened. You're getting all the rough parts of you scraped off. You can't develop as a character unless you face hardships.
Right. I think certainly to start the conversation, we are living in the same camp. You know, we are rent free in each other's attics right now.
Yeah, we're agreeing.
Which again, I didn't expect to find a lot here.
No.
Where I'd be curious to see if we part ways a little bit, or in the extremes.
Okay.
So let's take failure to its natural extreme. Well, let's not go quite to the extreme. But let's
Okay.
say no longer is it Kel having his hand severed.
Okay.
It is Kel falling on the battlefield, not to be resuscitated, permanent death.
Like death saving throws or like dead.
No, let's. I mean, I think, and we've taken some steps at the table
yeah.
to help build some tension with regard to the dying status, kind of. But I'm talking about player death or character death.
Death.
No longer an aspect of the story, or only so much as the party is willing to.
Right. So pretty much
maintain that.
making a new character kind of.
Yes,
yeah.
we're talking
Okay.
about rolling a new character. We're talking about. So I'm curious to see if we maybe differ in some of our opinions about failure with regard to death. I will be. I certainly know that maybe cavalier is not the right word, but I think you've been certainly more than everyone else at the table, more cavalier about Kel's mortality than some others, and whether that's an aspect of like gallows humor and being a soldier, and but I guess let's start on your end because ultimately you're a player, and we're talking
Right.
about character death.
Right.
I have characters that die all the time. Every
Clear.
goblin that I hold dear in my heart.
You wrote this epic backstory
Do
for.
you don't understand how much time I put in
You might
to
be
some of
putting
those
your
early
energy
encounters.
into the wrong things. bud.
No, that's where it belonged. And you guys wouldn't even treat with them. Okay. They begged to parlay and you would not treat with them. No. So talk with me as a player.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, let's call it that final roll.
Yeah. So I at the table, I am the one who is most open to my character dying. The reason why is a couple. One, I'm that guy who has like 5 characters in his back pocket, and all of them excite me.
I'm pretty confident that literally in the same session we could bring your next character in.
Not quite.
Okay.
I'd have to level them up, but I have like a great character concept, backstory, all that's great for this. For someone to replace Kel, and that's the thing is like I have a guy to replace Kel. I also have another character that if we have a TPK for our next campaign. I mean, I got all these guys.
Right.
Ready
And
to go.
that also speaks to, I mean, an aspect of the game that you really get out of it. I mean, you know,
I
the
love character creation,
character building and
Yeah,
character creation.
which is another thing
Yeah,
altogether.
and I'd love to dive into that. So, I guess, despite the fact that you have been pretty, as you said, open about that, and I think subsequently have been willing to take certain risks that a character that maybe is feeling more guarded or maybe more insecure about their mortality.
Yeah, like a jumping into the jaws of death.
Yes.
I've done it several times.
And the cool thing about that is there is a heroicism in that.
That's the thing.
Now it can get to the place where it's reckless, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I don't think I've crossed that line.
No, but I'm just saying that
There is that. Yeah.
being unshackled from, let's call it, a fear of death,
Mm-hmm,
player fear of character death,
Yeah.
really does allow you in those epic moments to look at the situation and go, if this is the difference maker,
Mm-hmm.
I'm prepared to.
And that is also a Kel thing. I think if you're different, like it depends on what your character would do.
I think it's an intelligence of 6 thing. It's
I know, right? But another thing, like I think you're kind of hitting on it, the heroic action. Talking back to stories and films, you always remember that guy who was who gave his life. He made the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
If you're crying in the movie, it's usually during those moments,
Right.
and just how cool of a way to go out.
Yeah, if your character's being written out of the story, and I think that really does speak to an aspect of failure that maybe is more on the DM side than it is on the player side. I think it actually mirrors leaning into your failures, but on the death side, I do think it really becomes incumbent upon a DM. Because no matter how open you are to that process, no matter how prepared you are for the reality that maybe my character is going to die, as a DM, I think anyone who's been sitting at the table, whether you're talking about a couple months campaign, a couple years campaign, I mean, there are people who have been playing the same game for a decade, 20 years. You know, I mean, massive stories that are unfolding. As a DM, I really think you owe it to your players to ensure that death is meaningful, is a moment that they can look back on and go, I mean, if they went, okay, I didn't want to go, but if I had to, this was the way.
That'd be nice. I'm trying to think, but that's not always the case. I mean, what happens when you fail your athletics check and just fall to your death climbing like some building or something?
Oh, no doubt. But I still think there is, let's say, a different set of gloves you want to put on as a DM if you are narrating to your table the actual fall of someone who has been invested in this character for maybe months, maybe years. That is a as far as I'm concerned, a no compromise area. I mean, it is a courtesy to someone who has been on this journey with you. And there are some people who flat out would be devastated to have their character fall, and other people who would be who could swallow that pretty readily, all the more if it was a heroic death.
Oh yeah, if it's heroic.
So much as I love seeing characters lean into their failures, and you don't get to witness player deaths often.
No.
But when they occur, I really think for the DMs out there or aspiring DMs, really take some time and think about what that means to the person who's been running that character.
Good point.
As a DM, you lose your characters, and we were riffing earlier on the whole goblin thing. There is no comparison between, but there are long-term NPCs that you become attached to. But none of that really correlates to the one entity you have in the game world. And there is something kind of sacred about that. So as a DM, making sure you are honoring that process, I think is a hugely important thing to be cognizant of should the time come.
Right, and kind of bouncing off that, if I were to die, I want it to be fair. Like falling rocks, and like I had no way to know it was happening, and also my character's dead. That's stupid.
Have you been reading my prep notes or something?
Right? No, but like in our current fight, we're fighting a fetus god thing. If Kel was to die in that fight, I don't. If it made sense, if he didn't all of a sudden have a magic power, it's like instant death, which happened to Rygar. Remember the Finger of Death? That was bullshit.
In my defense, that was a fucking module. So give you a sense of why the hell I'm not
You're a dick.
Then again, Finger of Death has been a long-standing. I mean, if you got a problem with Finger of Death, take it up with Wizards of the Coast, my friend.
But yeah, if it's fair, then it's so much an easier pill to swallow.
Yes, I on the topic of fairness, and I would say one begets the other. Fairness and trust, and we've talked about trust a lot. I don't know that there's an episode that we can touch on where there won't be some relevant conversation about trust, because so much about the game is pivoting on trust between the players, trust between the DM and the players.
Yep.
Failure in general, but especially the extremes like player death, TPK, those are failures that by definition are going to test yours and yours players' trust. If you have not nurtured an environment where they believe that, and it doesn't have to be down to that last roll. It doesn't have to be that I intended to create an encounter that would challenge you heavily, not an encounter that would kill you outright.
I see what you're saying.
That my goal is like if every time I sat down, I went, this encounter will potentially kill them, will likely kill them, will maybe kill them. For one, I would say all of our fights are going to be way too long, and they're going to be slogs. And
I could see almost a style of play that is that way.
Oh, I think so much of old school D&D had
Very
that
much.
feel. I mean, enemies were far more punishing. So much has changed to allow for kind of this more narrative space to blossom.
Exactly.
But first and foremost, if you do not have the trust of your players as a DM, I think you are in for some volatile reactions should you be ushering in a player death or a TPK.
Yeah.
And I think that so I would say all the more reason to get to a place with your play group where should a player fall in combat and make their final roll, should the entire party fall, that it's not hanging in the back of everyone's minds that encounter was designed either so poorly or so malevolently as to with the intent of doing that.
Right.
And I think, anyone who's running the game, you won't run the game long if you are actually trying, because
no one's going to play with you.
It will be very easy to do. There are no restrictions on what you
I guess, but you have to be a pretty not nice person.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's nothing about there's nothing. I guess you could reference like the wow, I'm totally losing the terminology. The CR rating.
Oh yeah.
Challenge rating was the word I was looking for. Challenge, ladies and gentlemen. The word was challenge. Challenge in the comments if you've got this far.
Tom is what challenge?
It's
Just kidding.
But put it in the comments. No, but so it's a deal where I guess you could reference that as a system, as a checks and balances for building encounters. But if a DM there's so much more going on than just challenge rating. If a DM is intent on being malevolent or being nasty,
Right.
it's going to happen. I don't think many DMs will survive that process.
No.
But
They shouldn't.
But it does speak to the importance of, and we were going to the extremes with death there. But in all failures, that when a failure occurs, that it is apparent to everyone at the table that is a failure because the dice determined it so, because the decisions that the players were making resulted in failure,
Right.
not that it was an unwinnable scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a very like slim well, maybe even a slim chance. Sometimes those are fun. But going off that, because I was thinking sometimes a player death can be almost predetermined to be a beautiful thing. Let's say something happens in the story where you're like, oh man, Kel could make the ultimate sacrifice, and it would be just like it would make the campaign. What would you do in that? Would you just do it in game? Would you have a conversation outside the table?
I absolutely think that's a scenario. I think I would be very reluctant to do that with a player, only because I think there aren't many lines that I believe are uncrossable as a DM with regard to their interactions with their players. But one that is, even if it's something like I think if that opportunity presented itself, that's something you would be open to. But there's some amount of agency that is being robbed if I come in and say, hey, I've got this awesome narrative thing. Because where does that line get drawn? I've always got some cool stuff that if you guys would just lend me a hand, we could make happen.
Yeah.
And we stop playing D&D and we start writing a play together.
Good point.
And so now that is not to say that as a DM, talking about those honoring player death, there are times where a situation is unfolding and you have a much better idea of the numbers behind the screen. You're looking at, hit point totals, damage output, you have a much better idea than the players at the table do.
Right.
Where you might be looking and going, if they stay on this course of action, someone's going to die.
Yeah.
We might be in a TP. I mean, there were multiple times in Old Peltark where I was frighteningly close to that. Like I was watching it and going like, oh shit, what did I do here? Like I didn't intend for this. Like they played out a lot tighter. I knew I wanted them to challenge you.
Right.
And that's all part of the DMing process too.
Learning. And they're learning the party and absolutely.
Exactly. But that's not to say that if I see something coming down the pipeline that it's like it's your turn and you say, you guys need to get the hell out of here. And you go, I'm going to hold the line. And I go, this is probably it for him. I know what the next turn looks like damage wise. I know what, if you decide you're going to bottleneck and get them out of there, that's my opportunity to start going, this needs to be meaningful.
Right.
He made the decision. Right. I didn't ask him to, but So being cognizant of the potential of death and kind of priming yourself for it, especially when you're writing encounters. There's times you put a combat encounter in where you go, there's no way they die to this. It's a flavor encounter. Maybe it provides a little challenge. Maybe there's some little twists in it that make it interesting. But there are encounters that you design where you go, if they're not on their toes, if they're not keeping their heads on straight, this could represent a player death. This could represent a TPK. So knowing that one of those is coming down the pipeline, knowing that you're ushering one of those in, we're in one of those right now.
Oh yeah.
Certainly I gave some thought to what am I going to say about Kel if this is his last fight? What am I going to say about Aster if this is so that's part of the prep of the session.
I noticed you didn't say Cat though, so she's guaranteed to make it.
Well, I didn't quite get there, but
No, I'm kidding.
I've actually been having a conversation with her recently, or just I should be having it with everybody. I know you're already on lock.
Yeah.
About the notion of going into production, it's not a bad idea for everyone to have an idea of who another character would be, because on this exact topic, death is a very real consequence in the game, and once we're kind of rolling, if we were just playing our home game, like we
Yeah,
like we
whatever
always do,
gets. Yeah.
there's no schedule to keep. If someone dies, we
Yeah.
can take the time to kind of bring a new. But so, anyways,
Yeah.
there's just that consideration.
Oh boy, no pressure there.
No
on this.
pressure there, guys.
Oh,
No pressure.
Basically, we're dead. That's good.
Let's go one extreme further.
Then okay.
Then because we really focused on player death. Now I think we're talking about
TPK.
TPK.
Okay.
And I know that is, I think it's even more gut wrenching as a party or as a player.
Yeah, because you totally fail. Well, in some cases, that campaign is now over.
Yes. Well, that's why I would actually consider TPK to be the player death equivalent for the DM.
Oh.
If it means the campaign is dead, what you are doing is you are staring down the one campaign that you've been, just like any player would be looking at their one character, and you're going to watch it die. And there's some interesting thoughts that I have actually on both player death and TPKs from the DM side. But let's talk a little bit about that as an extreme form of failure.
Yes, that's
And I would say to some extent, that's probably a shared failure. But there are certainly in between players and DM. But to claim that would mean that it's incumbent upon the DM to ensure that there is not a TPK, and I do not think that's the DM's job.
no, and the dice are the ultimate deciders. What are you going to do if they just cannot roll well and you're rolling like a boss? There's nothing you can do about that.
I mean, I do. I'm kind of known for
Yes,
they don't call me average 18 for. I mean, they call me it for a few reasons, but no. But so one thing I want to say as a DM, because I think TPKs for a lot of DMs can hold some of the same trepidation that a player death can for a player, a character death, I should say, can for a player, which is what generally drives characters to behave in a way that doesn't result in them dying.
Right.
Unfortunately, that can drive DMs to behave in a way that doesn't result in TPKs. And as I said, I don't think that's the role of the DM. The role of the DM is to set that table and let their decisions decide how it plays out. A major insulator, and I'll put this out for other DMs, is, and this goes for player death, this goes for TPKs. I get a tremendous amount of work goes into building out a campaign setting, building the lore, the story, the narrative that's been worked up on everyone's front, but certainly as
DM,
as a DM, don't let TPK represent the end of your campaign. If that means that you have trepidation about putting your characters in situations that could result in a proper TPK.
Okay.
And there's any number of ways. A good example, and this is our old campaign, our 4th edition campaign. I guess you call it a TPK. You were all turned to stone.
Yeah. No. Rygar in that moment died, and
yeah, and so
Roland was born.
Just an example, and this is from our much earlier years. So I don't even consider this a great example, but it is one example of the next group of heroes that kind of began questing, where ultimately their initial quest was to get to that room such that they could choose whether they wanted to, by the time they got to the room where the original heroes had fallen,
right.
They'd had some time to develop on their own, and they could kind of decide, am I willing to give up who I am now,
right,
such that I might be able to take on the destiny of these other heroes. And so that is not to say, I would second that by saying, in a broad campaign setting, the idea that there is one group of heroes,
that's where I was going,
striving to see evil undone, is ludicrous.
Yeah, if we were to TPK here, I wouldn't be like, all of a sudden I need to take Cal's shoe with a new character. I want to be like, oh, this is affecting the whole continent. And on this side, this is where this is happening. And these heroes are rising up.
And something right off the heels of making player death memorable, making it matter, making it count. There is so much opportunity in a TPK. If you are continuing that campaign in that setting, make that TPK meaningful. Does that region crumble into chaos
Ooh, I
without
like that.
the former heroes.
The East Falls. Yeah.
And you can create scars on the world where powerful heroes. I mean, at this point, we're talking about the Rovers are beyond really human capability. We're starting to push into the upper echelons. We'll call it mid echelons, but from here on out is where you really ascend into unbelievable hero status.
Right.
To lose that for any portion of the world, a world beset by evil,
That's a big deal.
should hold consequences.
Absolutely.
Just like any other failure in the game, as a DM, lean into it. It's one of the few times that you don't want to lean into it. Because there's so many times. You get to fail so many times as a DM and it means nothing. You go, oh man, Zerk the Goblin never got to tell his 18...
Why did I spend 18 days on this one goblin?
18 days? I spent months writing up that goblin.
Zerk.
But so it's a great, I think, example of where we ask that from our players. Lean into your failures, you know, as a DM, if the TPK happens. For starters, think about the world as a living environment that will continue on whether these heroes are here or not. And that there's still interesting stories to tell without losing all of the world building that you've done.
I like that. I really like that.
So think about that. And should the TPK come, lean into it, make it memorable, and really leverage that into something amazing instead of something that has the whole table kind of sulking around for the next few sessions.
Well, let me pose this to you because this is almost a conversation unto itself, very highly debated. So, as a player, don't cheat. And I'm going to flip this in a bit, and I think you can already see where I'm going to go with it. But I will freely admit to you, I have cheated in the past.
I expected nothing less.
And I'll tell you.
Do you remember what it was?
I cheated all the time.
Oh, okay.
I missed an attack. Oh, it was actually this was 4E, where it was beer and pretzels, dungeon clearing. Only focus was battles and winning.
Trusted you, you bastard.
Whatever. I think you knew the whole time, but.
I legitimately didn't.
Oh, well, you.
I'll go back to that notion of, and quite frankly, it doesn't bother me much, especially with 40, because it was really, it was more about getting together and having a good laugh.
That's all it was. It was I was getting my master's at the time. We just freshly married. Life was stressful. This was a release from that. But at one spot,
pretzels.
So good.
I know.
All soft pretzels with like
what I wouldn't give to just go back to the days of eating pretzels.
Anyway, dude, what we used to eat? Red Barons, taquitos.
Oh Jesus! Yeah. We had a all American diet going there during the 4th edition campaign.
But anyway, once 5E clicked off, I really started to. That didn't happen, and a big reason why is the story. 4E wasn't about the story. 5E it was about the story, and the characters growing. So. Don't cheat because you're robbing yourself of really memorable experiences. But the controversial subject is, do DMs, should they fudge their dice rolls?
I think, and we're going to get into homebrewing and bending of rules and stuff like that in a future episode.
Yeah.
But there are very few things I don't think are bendable or breakable in D&D. And that's with regard to encounter design, that's with regard to class structures, different things. The one thing that I think has to remain absolute, frankly, because I don't think you can draw a line. It would have to be such a bold tipped marker to. It's the dice roll. The dice. If the dice is fallible. Like if you have the lucky feat, we've got 2 luckies at the table. You'll learn all about that.
I'm a mid-maxer and I don't even choose lucky.
It's that cringe for.
No, actually, I might choose lucky my next character.
Oh,
but
Jesus, I was really enjoying how much he cringed about lucky, like not having to worry about that.
Value of it. Oh my god.
No, but when you roll a dice, and as a DM. I think that's the one place. Well, like I said, I think by all means, make encounters more difficult than the CR suggests they should be. Make them less difficult. Throw in abilities, item. I mean, do literally whatever you want. I don't think I really don't think there is a limit to it, so long as you're doing it in, let's say, an ultimately benevolent manner. You're not trying to be malevolent with those changes. You're not going like, well, the guide says I can only do this, but I want these fuckers to die. Like that's not the attitude you want with it. Do whatever you want, but let the dice remain sacred. They are kind of a and I can say I'm trying to think through all of 4E. I will say, to the best of my knowledge, I have never fudged a dice roll. I've broken all sorts of other rules.
But you never fudged dice
I've
rolls?
never fudged a dice roll.
Really?
Yeah,
I've
never.
I've always been curious.
Never.
Okay, good to know. I did.
That's
a lot.
That's something. It sounds like no, but the thing is that if you say, well, I'm willing to fudge dice rolls, again, we're starting to get into that place where I'm just writing a book now. I'm deciding at my own whim what successes and failures should occur.
Right.
I don't have the right as a DM. It's you are shackled in some few ways as a DM. And so be grateful for all the freedoms you have. Do not rob your players of the successes or the failures that are theirs. Those belong to them.
And an interesting thought happened to me. Some of our to be creative in this game, you need to be pushed to be creative sometimes. And when you are failing, you're like, oh man, this isn't working. You start to think outside the box. And if it wasn't for that impeding, like, oh crap, we're about to die. I mean, that's when like you really stretch your imagination.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you see people, just pull out wild. I remember this is back to the 4E campaign, but
maybe we should play 4E again. We're just going back there over and over again.
No. No, but it was a great encounter. I believe you guys were fighting an Etten, big two-headed ogre guy.
Oh yeah. Then we confused the head.
Yeah, and you got them arguing with each other.
Classic.
Ultimately ended up kind of Star Wars style binding of the legs as and they ended up falling down into the pit. I mean, it was a great example of just good creative play. People using different aspects to tackle an encounter, and that's another. I guess it can fit into the topic of failures. Is there are times where conceptually, and this is not this is. Separate from the dice rolls themselves. If someone says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this crazy thing. I'm going to convince those Ettins that they're, each head is at odds with one another, and they roll a natural 1. No matter how cool you might have thought,
you've got it. Yeah,
that was going to be. It's a natural 1. But if you went, I put this Ettin in here because he's going to fight you. He wants to fight you. That's what. And someone goes, I want to. If they roll decently, dispense with the notion that you had for that encounter, because you are creating a fail condition that dissuades creative thinking.
Yes.
And so do not create artificial fail conditions for your party, especially when they are acting creatively.
Yes, 100%.
I think so. I know we hit a number of deals.
Yeah.
And we've kind of failure is such a great topic. For a lot of different reasons. I think there's a little bit more rabbit hole we could continue digging down.
Always.
But just as a quick summary, just give me your synopsis on the player perspective of failure, and why the people at home should maybe embrace those nat ones a little more.
Yeah. So from the player side, a lot of amazing moments can happen out of failures, and character development happens out of failures. So instead of being afraid or scared or angry at your failures, embrace them and make them unique, and it will be to the enjoyment of all, including yourself. You'll have a much better time. And I kind of hinted at this, but you character development, you need failure to become something more. If you're always the best of the best, and it's boring, is what it is. It's just boring, and you shouldn't be playing a boring game. If you are playing a boring game, then you're not getting into D&D what you want. And when it comes to player death, you're mortal, and you're going, like, realistically, you're fighting dragons. I mean, there's a very high likelihood of death. Don't be afraid of it. Lean into it. If you're really that scared, I'm a big proponent of having a backup character, because then it takes that fear away a little bit. Like, oh no, what am I going to do when X dies? Oh, no worries, I got Y. Y will replace him or her. It'll be great. So yeah, that's my feeling on the PC side. But what about the DM side?
I mean, I think on just kind of the general notion of failure, we are pretty congruent. I think as a whole, everyone out there who's been playing the game for a while, running the game for a while, knows that when you guys are sitting around not playing the game, but reminiscing about those old sessions, from years ago, more often than not, it's the 2s, the 3s, the natural ones that you guys are laughing about.
Picking the lock, for example, poor
Amanda has had a hell of a time, despite having like
the best
expertise. I mean, just unbelievable lockpicking skills. Cannot roll above a 3 when she's picking locks. But and again, we still joke about that.
Oh yeah,
I think she has real world PTSD from lock. If ever we were in a situation where she needed to pick a lock to save our lives, she would lock up and we'd both be dead. It's a guarantee. So absolutely. The thing that I would say that's really specific on the DM side is don't create artificial failures for your players, especially because there are some elements of D&D rules as written that I think inherently dissuade certain creative play. Certainly in combat, there's often times where just hacking at that monster is the most optimized thing you can do. So again, let the dice be what they are. Let them be the one sacred thing at the table as a DM. As far as I'm concerned, I know there are many people out there who are going to disagree with that. That's why.
Then they should get their own show.
But well, hopefully on DM and the PM, I'll be able to press some people a little bit.
Nice plug. I like that.
It's DM and the PM. You got to check that shit out. That's some top tier content, pretty sexy stuff. But now that plug's out of the way, what do we got? 2 or 3 plugs for the session?
That's 2.
Okay,
2. We need one more.
Good. You'll get one more before it's over. No, but as a DM, we ask our players to lean into those failures a lot. We ask them to lean into those failures even when it means saying goodbye to a character they have been with for months or years. When we have to say goodbye to the entire party and that narrative that kind of existed around them, pay them the same respect, lean into it, make it something memorable for the whole table, but also don't let it dismantle all of the work you've done in creating this campaign setting. Really lean into that, and I think you guys at home are going to get a tremendous amount out. I would love to see in the comments, this should be a no-brainer. Comments should be loaded.
Yeah.
Write about your greatest failures. We want to hear DMs write about your greatest failures.
NPCs. There's some. You got some good ones.
There's some juicy ones out there. Get them out there. I want to remind everyone too that we are still looking for the sexiest "The World Is Yours" on the internet. Get us on social media. Links in the description. So post those so we can get you guys on the episodes.
So I want to hear "The World Is Yours," but I want to hear it as a damsel in distress.
Okay. Please, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. The world is yours. I probably peeked the mic there.
You probably peeked the mic.